And we are live. Welcome, welcome, thrice welcome to JWC Livestream. JWC Livestream, Sublimated Poesy with David and Ricky. I am Ricky. Hello. David, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Very good, very good. How are you today?
I'm doing fine.
I'm glad to hear that. So how about your creative life? What have you been, how has that been lately?
It's been very fruitful. I have been working on the book Athenaeum, and I've been writing poetry. So
Oh,
it's been,
excellent.
yeah.
That's good, man. Athenaeum is a project that David and I have been working on, I think, since late last summer, unless I'm mistaken. And it's a wonderful fantasy book that's just been a real honor and a pleasure to write. And David's working on plot B, and I've been reading. It's been really, really awesome stuff with a great voice. And your poetry, how's that been for you? What have you been has it been satisfying, and if so, why?
I'm going through a refocus, I would think, creatively, by subject. And if one writes enough poems, get they get bored by writing the same poem over and over, and they want to find a new direction to branch off into. And my main focus right now has been on simplicity and its finality, but also I want to explode the page and go very abstract for my own interest and pleasure. So I'm conceiving an idea for two books of poems, one on the subject of light and the other on darkness. And I've been slowly trying to come up with themes or what the focus of those books will have been. But it's been interesting. The lovely thing about being a writer for a long time is you grow into it like you grow into your life, and you achieve certain benefits of wisdom through your experience.
Sure, I've certainly found that to be the case. So yeah, I mean, creative phases, the very essence of it. In this case, like a back to basics exploration. Um, Sounds very interesting. Um, I've tried to take over the years when it comes to my poetry. And of course, there was a time when I thought I was a poet, and that's all that I thought I was. And then there was a falling out of love with the muse, and now I've returned to poetry, much thanks to you, good sir, good poet, for that. But it's like I've tried my best to keep a record of my creative phases, especially my poetry. There's like a tree of poetry that is growing from every true poet in my philosophy, and all the forks and branches are like going up is like they're like your phases, and the roots going beneath are like which poets have you read, and which poets have you loved and obsessed over and studied, that you adore, and those represent this like root system. So it's like I have lots of those phases, as I'm sure you do too. I wrote a couple poems. They're very, very dingy and raw and strange, but most of my poems are strange. So there's nothing wrong with that. I have to like go over them again. Um, Set aside essays for the moment. I've just been real busy with other things, but My plan is to get back to essays probably in April to try to finish the one, at least finish the one that I started, and maybe try to get another one done. And then by that time, who knows where we'll be with Athenaeum. There'll be a few more chapters that I have to complete in that project, which has been a real blast to write. No doubt Return to Compass City, which I've set aside for just a moment so I could write this Sturts Valley thing. It's a novella, probably 40,000 words. And it's been a blast. I'm more than halfway finished with it. Very strange and violent and symbolic. A real geode of unconsciousness, with all of its glint and facets and whatever when it's exposed to the light, you know. And I'm having a blast with that. So long story short, creativity has been great on my end. It sounds like it's been great on your end too. That's wonderful. When it comes to Antoneum and the two family with regards to narrative B, I'm sure that's been satisfying. It's been very satisfying to read it. But if I could ask you, which one of those characters do you like the best? Like, which one's your favorite?
I think I'm going to take the route that a father would say, and that I love all my children.
That's very good. That's very good, actually. That's good riposte. So yeah, folks, that's our creative obsession, as I like to call it. We all do stuff to make money, you know, like we have to do that, but like the satisfaction for a creative comes from whatever creative project they're working on. Like if I write a chapter or a poem or an essay or who knows what, there's a lot of what I call episodic satisfaction. Something to do with dopamine if we're gonna go into a materialist realm, a paradigm. There's something to do with like endorphins and dopamine and all that stuff. Satisfaction is a difficult thing to find. I don't know if you've noticed. Not everyone can just make it happen. Sometimes you gotta figure out stuff, especially creatively, go into your own consciousness and really, explore and obsess. So that's what creatives do. That's what creative obsessors do. Like there's things I have to do or I can't go to sleep. Like suddenly I'll get an idea, I have to stay up and outline it and secure it so that when I come back the next day, I have that muse flash preserved, almost like a footprint in plaster. So I know exactly the gate and like where it's going, and I can it also provides evidence of the actual project. How about you, David? What's your way of capturing ideas when inspiration strikes? How do you take them down?
I have a very inefficient method. I basically try to write them down as soon as possible. And if I can't, I think about them and obsess about them as if I had forgotten to turn the stove off in the kitchen.
Oh
And
yeah.
then by the time I reach home, I'm able to sit down and start writing. Otherwise, I might forget something. So, in a strange way, it's like keeping the fire burning.
That's
So you
fabulous.
can get to that point where you can write down your ideas.
Yeah, that anticipatory expectation and like I have like it won't let you go. Like you have like it is like a kettle. You're right. It's like something you have to have in the back of your mind. But it's like you're having a dream of a kettle that's going to boil, you know, because it's not even, there is no kettle, but it is the same. You're right. That's a very good way of capturing it, actually. So now is time for us to move on to the poem. Our poet today is Rumi, the one and only. It's excellent stuff. This poem we have for you today is If a Tree Could Wander. It's translation by Anne-Marie Schimmel, if I'm saying that correctly. And here we go. Oh, if a tree could wander and move with foot and wings, it would not suffer the axe blows and not the pain of saws. For would the sun not wander away in every night? How could at every morning the world be lighted up? And if the ocean's water would not rise to the sky, how would the plants be quickened by streams and gentle rain? That drop that left its homeland, the sea, and then returned, it found an oyster waiting and grew into a pearl. Did Yusuf not leave his father in grief and tears and despair? Did he not by such a journey gain kingdom and fortune wide? Did not the prophet travel to far Medina, friend? And there he found a new kingdom and ruled 100 lands. You lack a foot to travel? Do you then journey into yourself and like a mine of rubies receive the sunbeam's print? Out of yourself, such a journey will lead you to yourself. It leads to transformation of dust into pure gold. So that's a very, very beautiful poem. One would say unforgettable, rich with imagery. The concept of a tree wandering, moving as if it were, either a creeping thing or a thing that with wings that flies, animate. He suggests that it wouldn't be so vulnerable then, feeling the axe blows and not the pain of saws. Therefore, man's lot would be more complicated at the very least. If you had to wrangle trees in order to fell them to make houses, that would be very complicated. And a very cool idea besides. Would the sun not wander away in every night? How could at every morning the world be lighted up? So everything has to move in its way in order for stuff to be normalized and for the flow of time, temporality to continue. And then he goes cool with this image with the ocean's water turning into rain. It's a very, very elemental suggestion with all of its subtle metaphors and natural beauty. Because it says, without that, how are the plants to be quickened? And it suggests the rain swelling streams. The homeland, the sea, and then returned, the oyster turning into a pearl. All of these things with time, transformations with time, and they're therefore the beauty of their timeless hologram. Yusuf, not if he didn't leave his father, which is, in reference to the patriarch Joseph in the Torah and his son. Well, it's Jacob, the patriarch, and his son Joseph, because he was sold into slavery by his brothers and then became the governor of Egypt by fate. So this is like the transformation of the rainy season and the pearl, This is the genius of Rumi, weaving all of this together. Did not the prophet travel to far Medina? And there he found a new kingdom and ruled 100 lands. And I'm supposing that means Muhammad. So Muhammad's transformation through his life. This is just an amazing situation. He's asking, you don't have no feet, that you don't want to travel? And then he refers to minds being exposed to sunbeams and their facets, I suppose. At least that's how I'm taking it. And it's a wonderfully profound question. Out of yourself, such a journey will lead you to yourself. It leads to transformation of dust into pure gold. What a beautiful poem. What do you think of that poem, David?
It's a poem that I was introduced when I was an undergrad, and it was talked a lot about. I did not understand the history behind the man who wrote it, but we talked about such ideas, simple ideas of journey and self-discovery. And we looked at it from a metaphorical point of view, the various metaphors of the tree, the ocean, uh, the treasures of life, the risks that someone must take in taking on the journey of their life. Um, so when you boil it down to essential ideas, it's really about self-discovery, and that's how it was taught to me. And now, interestingly, before we recorded the show, Ricky and I had a discussion about it, and he gave me several interpretations that had not occurred to me. But I want to point out that I think any interpretation of a poem is valid. And that's why poetry can be so universal, is that the reader can take it and apply it to their understanding of meaning and value and their values. So one could take the poem quite literally, brick by brick. One can take the references to jewels and gold, or journeying of prophets, or sons sold into slavery, and think of that as just being a very historical poem, as examples of things that happen to people who go on journeys in life. But there's always an end point, a point where they get to, where there is a treasure that's not necessarily gold or material things, but a better understanding of themselves, because they lived life in the present and they lived life with courage. So those are the things that are buzzing in my head right now that can change tomorrow. And that's also another wonderful aspect about poetry.
Yes. Poems are unique that way. I've always said to myself, as far as the philosophy of my perception of creativity and of art, I feel like novels are more like cinema, whereas poems are like you're going through a museum and you're seeing like a poem is more like an exhibit to me. Like epic poetry and stuff obviously can have a grand narrative and therefore cinematic quality, and there's certain domains of poetry that could probably do the same thing, but I feel like I'm studying a painting or a sculpture or like a piece of armor or some sort of trophy or gemstone or something when I read a poem. And the more I get to look around and scan it, the more of its uniqueness and its beauty, the creativity that I see. So I think you're right about how things can be perceived, and how not only can they change, but I think there's certain perceptions that are like inevitable, that they occur to you the longer you study it, So that was a really, really cool poem. No matter how you look at it, I mean, I think it speaks of transformation, almost throughout. Such a quality is also like the hologram of the atoms, the very essence of the elemental cosmos itself, unfolding the constancy of change. All that stuff is very, very cool. And how did you phrase it? You think it's the process of courage, of will, that all those things should endure to see their fulfillment. Is that what you suggested?
I sort of, yeah. I think of it as a call to being. It's like a trumpet call that it's a horn that Rumi is blowing. Live in the present, go on your journey. Don't stay fixed in your misery or in your suffering. You can walk away from it. You can grow and develop as a human being. You can develop spiritually. You can develop intellectually. You can transform yourself into your true nature, that the essence of who you are as an individual.
Hmm. So submit to your transformation and allow it to shape you and benefit from it, not fighting it, you know.
Right, right.
Nature take its.
Um, Courage is a very important characteristic. It's something that everyone who wants independence or access to life in the present, um, they have to make it part of their life. They can't live in the past. They can't live for the future. They have to live in the here and now.
Hmm. Yes, yes. So a measure of a measure of a prescription for enlightenment, as it were. Um, yeah, I like it. I like what it says about impermanence and the essence of perseverance and such. I like your interpretation of that poem. Um, and of course, the poem itself. I have to do a lot more reading of Rumi. I mean, I find that to be um, fascinating, you
I
know?
think all Westerners should read Rumi.
Mm.
I think it should. I think his writing should be taught in schools. His quotes, his epigrams, his poems. There's much value and wisdom in his poetry.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And I have read Rumi before. I have at least one book of Rumi's poems laying around somewhere, but it's been a long time. And that's part of the thing when you depart from poetry is you have to reintroduce yourself to all these wonders. So it's almost like a second journey, a second ascension. Um, but it was a real pleasure checking this one out.
Yeah.
Uh, do you have anything else to say with regards to this poem?
Specifically, I would say that a poem is an opportunity to slow down your life and meditate. And if you are open to the experience, you can transform that dust into gold, that dust of your life. That it has to be done by the reader. So every individual has to do the work themselves. It's a journey that they have to go on themselves.
Well said, sir. The So, like, becoming a poet is not unlike the rain evaporating into clouds, or the sea making the pearl come into being. It's like it's a journey, and if we honor Rumi, then we want to take that journey. We want to allow the transformation to occur. Um, that's very, very cool. Very, very cool. So that was the reading of a poem by Rumi called If a Tree Could Wander. And I found it to be an excellent poem, very, very fascinating, rich with imagery, certainly to be read and reread, to study for its power, which is there's a tremendous amount to be had. But now we're going to learn a little bit about Rumi, the poet. Um, Jalal al-Din Muhammad Rumi, and he was a Persian man. He's more popularly known as simply Rumi. He was born in September 1207 AD, and they say he died in December of 1273. That's the 13th century, a Persian poet. He was an Islamic scholar and a theologian, a Sufi mystic, originally from the greater Khorasan, greater Iran. Rumi's influences transcend national borders and ethnic divisions. Iranians, Kurds, Tajiks, Turks, Greeks, Pashtuns, and other Central Asian Muslims, as well as Muslims of the Indian subcontinent, greatly appreciate his spiritual legacy and his poetry. His poems have been widely translated into many of the world's languages and transposed into various formats. Rumi has been described as the most popular poet and best-selling poet in the United States. Rumi's works are written mostly in Persian, but occasionally he also used Turkish, Arabic, Greek. One of his greatest poems of the Persian language, he worked widely writing them in their original language in Iranian in the Persian speaking world. But there are many, many translations. So his stuff is all over the place. His poetry has influenced not only Persian literature, but also literary traditions of the Ottoman Turkish, among others. Rumi's poetry is often divided into various categories: the quatrains, odes, the 6 books of Masnavi, and his prose works. He also seems to have correspondences and Islamic sermons under his belt as far as his greater body outside of poetry. Rumi's best known work, his spiritual couplets, there's 6-volume poem, and they hold a distinguished place within the rich tradition of Persian Sufi literature, and has been commonly called the Quran in Persian. Many commentators have regarded this as the greatest mystical poem in world literature, which is really, really something. This great poem, likely set the stage for later poetry in this style by other mystics who wrote in couplets to emulate Rumi. It's really, really something. As to the universality, Shahram Shiva asserts that Rumi is able to verbalize the highly personal and often confusing world of personal growth and development in a very clear and direct fashion. He does not offend anyone, and he includes everyone. Today, Rumi's poems can be heard in churches, synagogues, Zen monasteries, as well as downtown New York art performing centers. To many modern Westerners, his teachings are one of the best introductions to the philosophy and practice of Sufism. And in the West, Shahram Shiva has been teaching, performing, sharing the translations of the poetry of Rumi for nearly 20 years, and has been instrumental in spreading Rumi's legacy in the English-speaking parts of the world. So this person preserves the poetic tradition, and we went over how influential he was, especially to Persian literature, but all over the place. though it seems as if the whole Middle East and Mediterranean claim Rumi as a master, and he's spoken of everywhere in spiritual context certainly, but every poet I've ever known has valued Rumi, and it's I understand why. It's inescapable, you know. Um, the
Yes,
very
it's he's thought of as a great teacher.
yes, yes, and I can see why. Um, because it seems as if there's a series, a branch of his poetic tree that does this. It's almost like, because that poem we read about the trees, it has an air of encouragement to it. Like it feels like it heartens you, you know? It's like it prepares you for the difficulties of life. So if his stuff is based in that, almost like to encourage the young to reach and do the right thing, or to fulfill themselves at the very least, to not go unfulfilled. That sounds great, you know?
That's the advice a father would give to a son, or a mother to a daughter.
Yes, a good father who loves their children, certainly.
Yes.
Yeah, I heartily agree. Um, so that's really something. What do you know about Rumi, David? Um,
Um, the short answer is not enough. I have filled my head with straw and bits of styrofoam, and I think one of the essential legacies of Rumi is that he teaches his students how to remove that straw and styrofoam.
yes. To filter out whatever gobbledygook and focus on the treasures and the transformative beginning
The
of
transcendent that you like to speak of.
yes, we were wandering around that corner sooner or later, because that's the essence of what's being advocated, is for you to transcend your more primitive state, or your more the state of your infancy, let's say, or your earliest development, your origins, it could be said. And that's the purpose of fulfillment, is to attain a transcendence and move to the next level, fulfill your breed, become what you want to do, have your dream come true, etc. So
Yes, one could even say that Rumi is saying that every individual, every single person is a unique treasure, and that taking their life journey will um, bring them to discover the uniqueness of their treasure.
yes, yes, indeed. And in this case, we're dealing with transcendence, so we're dealing with a non-material treasure. We're dealing with a something that is treasured, a treasured experience, or the experience of being treasured, perhaps treasuring yourself, being adored by someone, being treasured by a family member, or a mate, or a child of yours. All those things are very, very impactful and significant. And that's what Rumi wants you to lean into, you know? It's very, very cool. Um, so what do you think would be the motive of such a person in writing something like this, you know?
It's
Uh,
we know that he was a teacher and a scholar, and we know that he was a community leader and worked among the poor. So this is something that could fall into a sermon very easily. These are the kinds of words that he would speak to a group of people um, to help lift them out of their suffering and their pain, to give them courage. And there is a direct Sufi intention of getting in touch with God directly. That there doesn't have to be this barrier between a cleric or a priest, in between a child of God and God. That there should be direct access. Everyone should have that direct access.
Yes,
It's
yes.
very revolutionary too, the Sufi movement. It's the closest equivalent in Europe would be Martin Luther, I think, when he demanded that the Bible be translated out of the Vulgate and into languages that everyone can speak and understand. That the word of God should be in the mouth of every human being. So it's the kind of thing that starts revolutions. So the Sufi, I should say Rumi rather, I apologize. Rumi is a very, very important historical character, a person. And yeah, I think it would be very difficult to overestimate his impact on world history. Um, what do you think about that?
Yes, I heartily agree with you and with the scholar, biographer, and advocate of Rumi, who was talking about the influences that he had over Persian literature, and indeed over literature over the, like I said, over the Middle East and Mediterranean regions. You know, that's quite something to say, given when he lived, stuff was preserved and circulated. All the translations, the different languages, different interpretations. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a way to overstate what Rumi brought to the table as far as an impact to poetry, and apparently to culture also, you know, certainly. So the wisdom in all this, what is to be gleaned? Um,
Um, the wisdom is that wisdom that is not applied to the living is not wisdom. It's um, it's written word on a page, but it's certainly not. It has no value unless it's applied to living in the present. That would be my takeaway from it. What do you think about that notion?
no, I agree. If it doesn't have a practical application and supply a benefit, then perhaps it's not wise. If it doesn't tell you about the workings of nature and of man's reckoning of the seasons, then perhaps it is not wise. That is true. That's sort of the backsplash of the meaning to all this. Is he's in a very, very distant sort of way telling you about what wisdom is. And you're right, David. You're absolutely right. It's a brilliant observation, because the poem that we read is filled with that elemental imagery going throughout it. You know, so it's like it makes me think of Hermes Trismegistus, or the book of Ecclesiastes or something. You know, perhaps Confucius. You know, it's very, very interesting the way that there's codexes for wisdom, that different cultures can speak of the same thing in very, very similar ways. Um, I agree with you, though. That was very, very cool of like what you pointed out there. So there is wisdom. I mean, I was thinking with regards to all this transformational stuff, but
Um,
you cut to the quick. You actually, that's a very good thing.
we can certainly talk about that if there's time. I think that it works very much in the way that most poetry does. It uses metaphoric language to create spaces that are large enough to cover the experience of many people. So rather than root something in a contextual way, it uses language um, that is out of context in a specific way. So it's very generalized. That's the power of poetry, is that metaphor can be a tool that's not only applied by the poet, but also the reader when they read. And
Mhm.
I have for a long time taught the idea that a poem is only half completed if it's never read. Until it's read, it has no purpose in the world. I think earlier I sent you a clip of the filmmaker George Lucas, and he was talking about art that's not seen. It doesn't have any real use, and that to be called popular is not an insult, and it's not a failure. It means that uh, you're um, you're reaching people, and it's having an effect on people. So maybe that should be the focus. What do you think of that idea?
I heartily agree. And when it comes down to the concept, I'm a big believer in book craft, getting your work out. If it's not out there in a format that can be read, watched, enjoyed, etc., then no one knows the great workings of the muse, the networking of minds, all the creative obsession, all of the transcendent creativity over the years. If it's not in print, if people can't read it, I mean, I agree with you. It's like it's as if it's not finished. That's why I have such a reverence for print. The concept of I mean, going all the way back to the Gutenberg press, but the singularity, the media singularity is what I try to call it, because it goes all the way up to the internet today and what we're doing right now with this live stream. It's media, it's publishing, consciousness, unconsciousness being networked, consciously discussing, unconsciously questioning, and causing people to do the same. It used to be a priority getting people to think. It used to be a priority. Today's culture seems like it's a priority to get people to stop thinking as much as possible. So I love that stuff, and I think Rumi did too. You know, because without all those translations and circulations out into the Arabian and Mediterranean world, no one would know who Rumi was. So it's vital. I couldn't agree more.
Also, if we think about Rumi as a man, uh, as a father, and as a teacher, that is a person that no longer exists in the world, but his wisdom will live eternally. And the reason that it will live eternally is because there's resonance in truth in what he said and what he wrote, and people preserve it. They can recognize the light of creation in it. And I think he would be very content with only his the light that he shined. It would be more than enough for him. Um, so we could venture into areas of discussions about immortality if we wanted, and what is the role of the artist. The artist may be a cipher, may be a translator of things that are beyond the temporality of this world. But the mere fact that they get to put their name on it is just a byproduct of their duty and responsibility of creating that light. What do you think of that idea?
Yes, well, again, in order for it to plug into print and therefore be published, there has to be a legalistic underpinning that gives credit to the author so that everything is in its proper place, when it comes to whatever agreements they've made with the publishing house. And that leads to the furthering of their creativity. So yeah, I would agree, in as much as that. I know it's a deeper concept than that, because you're actually talking, I think you're also addressing ideas to the pen to the page to the reader. So you're articulating all of that, and I agree with that also.
So yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with that. There's um, I think a true artist is someone who minimizes their ego in service to their ideas. And if they're unable to do that, then they're more of a high functioning egoist who has creative skills. So a true artist is someone who is in the service of something much greater than they can claim credit for creating. It's more like they're a secretary to God or to some higher organization or power, if you wish to describe it in that way.
Yeah, well, the forces of inspiration and unconscious transcendence that give the artist their spark, what it is that I mean, it directs them partially, but it also sets them free, you know? Um, yeah, yeah, I agree. And I think Rumi would agree also, you know? So that's very good. But to sum it all up, allow the craft of writing poetry to transform you. Allow it to fulfill you. Submit to it. Don't fight it. Don't be intimidated by it. Take time out of your day to be in a meditation space in the Jungian sense and be creative and write a poem, you know, write a beautiful poem. Express yourself through that. Become the pearl, you know, become the rain that sustains plants and quickens them, you know. Um, that's a very, very big deal. And that's something at JWC that we always take very, very seriously. Um, Not serious like it's a problem, serious like it's a solution, you know, because creativity does that. It really helps you out. Creativity is liberty, you know.
Yes, yes, I was about to mention if you go to Ricky's Twitter page, um, it's there in his bio. And that's a very interesting idea and a very true idea. Um, so I would say that the more that an individual conforms to a society, the more enslaved they become to a certain extent. But one has to also keep in mind that the individual has a contract with society. So there are the limits of one's individual rights are liberation, and at the point where another individuals begin. So that is something that needs to be meditated on too. So one cannot act with impunity. One has to go into the world with a sense of accountability and with a respect for the individual and the awareness that they're not the only individual.
Yes, absolutely. Something just occurred to me while you were speaking. You could say that I was inspired, but what is the difference? And I'm saying, you know, this is because this is a pretty heavy question. So, but what is the difference between submission and conformity? You know, and how can one benefit while the other, like, how can one sharpen the mind while the other dulls it, you know? Um,
So you want me to distinguish between submission and conformity?
yeah, like
They're
what are
closely related terms. I would say that um, conformity is on the lighter end of the spectrum, and that submission has terms, connotations of maybe masochism and uh, sadism. So if one thinks a good way to think of it, I would say, is to think about the individual is if that person is not in tune with using their mind in a critical way, they're more likely to become what is called a slave mentality. So they are more of a response machine to whatever the environment around them. So they've sort of shut down whatever that, that little garden inside their mind and their imagination, where all of the weird plants and flowers are blooming and all of the birds are singing and everything that makes them unique, absolutely unique in the cosmos. And if they conform and only serve an ideology, that then they are what would be, I would consider, a slave. Now, I don't know if that's a helpful distinction.
No, I think it's a very helpful distinction, and I think it focuses in on the nature of the difference. It's like submission and conformity. Like submission is, it has the underpinning as far as subordination. There's subordination and there's insubordination. When you're insubordinate, you're going against the orders or the order, the orthodoxy or the cultural norm with a counterculture or a subculture. But when you're dealing with this, it's like, what are you rebelling against? Like to rebel against wisdom, that must be folly. But to conform to wisdom, that is seeking wisdom, because wisdom is not harmful or neglectful or unwholesome for the organism. It tends to be noted by its benefits. So
I think shutting down one's connection to their instincts is the beginning of the process. So if one ignores that voice inside their head or shuts down the dialogue that's occurring in their head, then that's the beginning of the formation of a slave mind. And that's the beginning of the banality of evil. So it's very important that people have an ongoing dialogue going on in their head, such as in a dialogue in Socrates, where there's a question, a reply, and then another question based on that reply. So you're constantly questioning the truth of things. You're not signing off in a way that sells your soul to the devil, or you sell yourself over to some political idea. You're constantly evaluating and basing it on your values and what you think is good for a healthy human being, yourself and your family, your community.
Wizened individuality. Yes.
Yes. I mean, there's a contract. I think people live a private life and then a public life, and a sort of a situation of imbalance. What Native Americans would have called koyaanisqatsi occurs when the one side of that duality has supremacy over the other. So if the side of the individual that's dominating their personality is public, then it's going to lead to unhealthy practices. So there has to be a balance between between conformity and rebellion, because there's no possible way that any written word or text can represent the needs of every single living person. It's just not possible. So that would be my reply to it.
Mm.
This is, of course, very abstract, meandering, considering the subject of the poem, but it is very interesting.
No, I mean, I like how you wrap that up and put a bow on it, honestly. I think it's fantastic. That's what we do, folks. We try to, we read we read the poem, we talk about the poem, we talk about the poet, and then we try to get to wisdom. And sometimes wisdom, you got to go around Robin Hood's barn to get to wisdom sometimes, especially with such beautiful poesy coming from Rumi, where everything is so deep, everything's profound, but it's also like simple. It's simple enough that almost, a child, when it's explained to the child will never forget a lesson like that. Masterful poetry and a wonderful show. I mean, time flies when you're having fun. And we had a blast because that went by like that. And here we are. So it's plugs time. Got to keep the lights on. Head over to joeswritersclub.com. Check out our author pages and our blogs, our author bios, rather. Go to joeswriters.club and sign up for our forums. Check out JWC, that's Joe's Writers Club, social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And of course, go to our YouTube channel, please. Like and subscribe, share with your friends if you like the content you're hearing. Which is like, what's not to like, Anybody who's a fan of poetry or of the creative spirit and wants a little more of that in their life, I think they get a healthy dose of it here. I want to thank David for coming on and providing his insight, which is very, very valuable to me. I feel like I learn every time we do a show like this. I learn a little bit myself. So thank you, David. All right. Well, it's time that we say goodbye for this evening. We try to do this every week, so we'll be back real soon, talking about creativity and transcendence, and poetry. I became what I am as a writer today through poetry and through the muse. That and my love for storytelling. Poetry taught me stuff to tell better stories, to understand all those concepts of observation and beauty and consciousness and awareness. Poetry was my guide. So I suggest you take time to write a poem every once in a while. If you journalize, like if you keep a journal, you're halfway there. It'll benefit your life. You have to make yourself a better writer. Joe's Writers Club and organizations like it are there to make you a different writer. But you, like David says, you have to put the work in yourself. But it's deeply satisfying and its rewards are many. So thank you for listening to JWC Livestream Sublimated Poesy, and we'll catch up with you real soon. Have a good one.